6 years and 1 day after Hitler invaded Poland, Japan signed the Instrument of Surrender. September 2nd, 1945. No one will ever know how many died. No one will ever know the name of the first or the last victim. But they are the story of the Second World War. Not the tanks that could not move, or the planes that could not fly, or the ships that could not sail without them. War is about people, in uniform or not. People in cities, villages, jungles. Strangers as allies. Neighbors as enemies. Hundreds of millions of people for whom for 6 years and 1 day there was hell on earth. There was no peace after the war. After the bloodshed of 1914 to 1918, after the peacemakers had all gone home, fighting did not stop. Civil war in Russia, then in China, then in Spain, invasion in Ethiopia, in Austria, in Czechoslovakia, the Chaco War, street battles in Germany, in America, the pain of going hungry, of having no work, the rise and rise of dictators. Then, one more invasion. But this time, the whole thing fell apart. September 1st, 1939. The first argument about the war, which goes by different names in different places, is when did it start?
Second World War began in Asia, at a bridge called Lugotiao, known in the West as the Marco Polo Bridge.
Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the Chinese nationalist government, said that he would seek a peaceful settlement. But he added,
"Perhaps now is the time to make public the declaration to demonstrate our determination to fight."
He ordered a general state of alert. He ordered his troops to prepare for resistance.
He did represent the nation more than anybody else, I think. Of course, quite largely thanks to his wife, Mei Ling. She portrayed her husband as very much, the guardian of China, the man who is standing up to the Japanese oppressor.
The Japanese used the Marco Polo Bridge incident as an excuse for launching a full-scale invasion. And the Second World War had begun.
The war between Japan and China, anticipated for some time, passed from the period of small local actions to more concentrated warfare.
Beijing fell apart after 2 days, and Tianjin 2 days after that. When the help he expected from Britain or America failed to materialize, Chiang Kai-shek, as commander-in-chief, said,
"Since all hope for peace has been lost, all we can do now is resist to the bitter end."
Chinese officer recorded in his diary.
Intense Japanese artillery fire, as if it would level the mountains and wipe out the sea.
Nanjing fell to the invader on December the 13th. And the cruel violence that would claim more civilian than combatant victims in the Second World War began to count its dead.
Battle, massacre, pestilence, and starvation have claimed more than 5 million Chinese lives. And millions more, their homes and villages destroyed, are today hungry, frightened refugees.
The exact death toll of the Nanjing violence can never be known. Not less than 50,000. Perhaps 6 times that number. The dead were thrown into pits. The living were buried alive. The tortured and murdered were hurled into the river. Japan's head of military security in Shanghai expressed the racist attitude that made violence possible. He said,
"We can do anything to such creatures."
A Japanese soldier wrote in his diary,
I trod on the corpses of Chinese soldiers without care, for my heart had become wild.
Mutilated bodies were burned. Women were raped and disfigured.
A long time ago, we thought that events like the rape of Nanjing were out-of-control madness. But now, as with most other mass atrocities against civilians, it's becoming increasingly clear that they were much more controlled than that characterization would suggest.
This nightmare of cruelty was all the more horrible because it was deliberately planned by the Japanese High Command to tear the heart out of the Chinese people once and forever.
A Japanese officer wrote,
In times of peace, these acts would be totally unthinkable and inhuman. But in the strange environment of the battlefield, they are easy.
He would be proven right on every battlefield, on every continent. Europe turned away from China's tragedy, distracted by the Anschluss. Adolf Hitler, appointed German Chancellor in 1933 and named Führer in 1934, had marched into the demilitarized Rhineland without a shot being fired. In the Anschluss, he sent his troops into and annexed Austria. He then began to demand the ethnic German part of Czechoslovakia, known as the Sudetenland. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain led an attempt at conciliation, known as appeasement.
Neville Chamberlain has had a very bad press. He's been blamed for the failure of appeasement. My own sense is that what he was doing was an honorable and justifiable thing.
He's been completely influenced in his thinking by the letters he's received. Who are these letters from? And these are postbags and postbags full of letters. And these letters are mainly from women, mothers and wives.
Out of this little danger, we pluck this flower, safety.
He was not the naive, wide-eyed idiot that some people portray him as. He didn't trust Hitler. He was trying to get the best deal.
Appeasement reached its climax with the deal made at Munich.
Finally, the most popular arrival of all. To a world balancing on the brink of chaos, Mr. Chamberlain stands as the savior of peace.
Munich is about buying time to a large extent. It's about not being ready to fight. And it's about exploring options, although they're ever decreasing options.
We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire never to go to war with one another again.
The Sudetenland was surrendered to Germany in exchange for the promise of no more territorial ambition.
But of course, Hitler rips up the treaty within months.
The future became the present on March 14, 1939. Adolf Hitler threatened Prague with complete destruction by the Luftwaffe unless the nation surrendered itself unconditionally to Germany's protection.
He sends in the tanks into taking over the rest of Czechoslovakia in early 1939.
The hoped-for continued world peace had placed the free world into the untenable position of compromising with a power-mad dictator.
That's where you know that this man's shopping list just continues and you're on it.
The sacrifice of Czechoslovakia was to prove, given an inch, Hitler would now reach for a mile.
Next on the shopping list was Poland. Franz Halder, Chief of Staff of the Army High Command, explained the plan.
The intention of the Führer and Goering? To destroy and exterminate the Polish people.
Propaganda ruthlessly shaped German opinion.
It is a narrative that there are acts of aggression by the Polish army against Germany's territorial integrity. Germany is provoked by Poland. Poland is rearming. Poland has got the guarantee of the British and the French. And Poland is mistreating the German minority.
At 4:45 a.m. on the 1st of September 1939, the German cruiser Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish fort of Westerplatte. At that moment, without warning or declaration, German soldiers with air and naval support invaded Poland from 3 sides.
Communications blown up as the defenders impede the invasion every way they can.
Moishe Fishman, a young man who would survive Auschwitz, remembered,
Suddenly German bombers appeared. There was no war declared. They asked for volunteers. We had to be the fire brigade. We were not equipped to deal with the incendiary bombs. All we had were buckets of water.
Place after place is captured as the mechanized columns speed on. From the north, they're driving toward Warsaw.
1.5 million German soldiers in 67 divisions invaded. Aircraft were opposed by a Polish air force of 400 machines.
This was the day Germany had been building for and waiting for. And with larceny in their hearts, they gloried in the destruction they were letting loose upon the world.
Hans Lehmann was one of the soldiers.
When we marched into Poland, there were corpses all around. They lay around and no one bothered about them.
I have to tell you now, this country is at war with Germany.
The reaction of the Allies to the invasion of Poland was to declare war on Germany, but the actual practical effect of what they would do next was problematic because, of course, there was no easy way they could get troops and material in to assist Poland.
Hermann Goering, Supreme Commander of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was disturbed by Britain's declaration of war.
If we lose this war, God help us.
By September 6th, Warsaw's air defense was limited to 96 anti-aircraft guns.
Warsaw is the first big city that is being bombarded from the air, so they are suffering, and the city is getting, well, to 20% or so. It's getting destroyed, and you have dead lying on the street.
Stefan Stashinsky, the Lord Mayor of Warsaw, reported,
"In the early hours of the morning, 7 of our hospitals were bombed.
Wounded civilian victims of earlier air raids in the city had occupied these beds when this raid came. It was like a grim avenger, relentlessly determined that they should not escape, that they should find no peace."
Jadwiga Sosonowska was a nurse.
A girl of 16, both legs a mass of bleeding pulp. I bent over to kiss her brow. She died quietly.
On the 13th, dive bombers caused widespread fires. Finally, on the 25th, Warsaw endured the largest air raid the world had seen to that point.
There was a very strong belief that targeting large urban areas was the way that you would win a war on this scale. And to some degree, really, the war itself was only about that policy gradually coming to fruition.
Adam Goldberg was an eyewitness.
The German Stukas flew overhead and machine-gunned. People and retreating soldiers also. There were many dead.
Many of the middle-aged were sullen and angry. Youngsters were half resentful, half resigned, while their elders turned to prayer. These are the faces of a nation besieged.
When the fighting war began, so did the war against civilians. The German policy was called Schrecklichkeit, frightfulness. Hitler said,
"My death's head formations to kill without pity or mercy all men, women and children of Polish descent or language."
On the day that Britain and France declared war, 55 peasants were rounded up and shot at the village of Truskolaci.
There had been murders, there had been people who were killed, people were displaced, but never on the scale of the Third Reich. And so who would have thought? Who would have thought that this was going to happen?
As German forces advanced into Poland, 120,000 Japanese in 6 divisions advanced on the Chinese city of Changsha.
There are people who say Japan's mission is to expand in Asia, not least because of this assumption that a weak China and a weak Korea, in the face of the onslaught of Western imperialism, make Japan itself vulnerable.
Kurisayashi was barely into his teens when he volunteered to fight.
We listened to stories about others who had died for our country. Basically, education was all about teaching us to die for our country.
Changsha, defended by outgunned forces, turned back the assault under the leadership of a Cantonese general, Shui Yoi, who wrote,
"We have destroyed China, removed every stone, burned down every farm, torn up every railway track. And we have done this so successfully that the Japanese have repented of their invasion."
But because of the imperialist threat, and also because of the Japanese invasion, which was also imperialist threat, right, to make the Chinese to realize, oh, now we need to fight together against the enemy from the outside.
That which is stronger than stone walls had at last been born in China. The will to resist. The people who wouldn't surrender. The people determined to fight for their freedom, their good earth. The people who can't be beaten.
Japanese policy was committed to expansion for territory and resources. One faction favored going north, another striking south. The balance was tilted by a battle between Japanese and Soviet troops on the Mongolian border.
In remote Mongolia, Japan and Soviet Russia are fighting, with planes shot down and sky fighters swooping back like this to land at their base.
The Japanese defeated in Mongolia consolidates this idea that to save ourselves we need to go south rather than going north.
The Soviet-Japanese peace agreement, following the Battle of Khalkhin-Gol, guaranteed Stalin's Asian frontiers against Japanese aggression. Thus reassured, and as secretly agreed with Hitler, Stalin sent the Red Army into Poland.
The annihilation of Poland would mean one fewer bourgeois fascist state to contend with.
It was really a very big surprise for the Polish army, because they have no idea for what Soviet army came on this territory. Will they help to the Polish army to fight against Nazis, or will they just take this territory of Western Belarus?
Subjected to almost continuous bombardment by the Luftwaffe, the Polish capital, with its 1 million inhabitants, fought on against overwhelming strength for 3 weeks. Completely cut off, with supplies of food and water almost finished, with totally inadequate defensive equipment, a helpless target for Hitler's bombs and shells, Warsaw fought on till the 27th of September.
Warsaw surrendered. A German soldier observed.
Polish heavy guns are being carted off by our soldiers. Lorries are already moving to the woods to take the prisoners away.
On September 28th, Radio Warsaw played Chopin's Funeral March, and on the 29th, the Nazis and the Soviets divided the country. 65,000 Polish troops were killed in the fighting. 420,000 others became prisoners of the Germans. 240,000 prisoners of the Soviets. Zygmunt Klukowski was one of those affected.
The Germans posted several new regulations. All men of Jewish religion between the ages of 15 and 60 must report at City Hall with brooms, shovels, and buckets. They will be cleaning city streets.
As a result of the invasion, the number of Jews living under Nazi rule jumped from 300,000 to 3 million. Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer of the SS and one of the most powerful men in the Nazi regime, was clear about what was intended.
The time has come to drive this rabble into ghettos, and then epidemics will erupt, and they'll all croak.
A new subject introduced to the curriculum was racial science. So obviously this was very much connected to Nazi racial ideology. It meant that history was conceived of in racial terms.
The first genocidal massacres took place. 6,500 on the parade ground at Grupa. More than 10,000 in the gravel pits at Mniszek. The tone had been set.
All of the other things that follow can only really be understood once you appreciate the identity that was being crafted and people were embracing and internalising of what it meant to be German.
The writer George Orwell spoke for many.
Millions of others like me have got a feeling that the world's gone wrong.
Britain dropped 12 million leaflets in retaliation for the invasion of Poland. They called it the Confetti War. Hitler's Minister for Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, noted in his diary,
"The Führer is of the opinion that England must be given a KO blow. Quite right, too."
On October 9th, Hitler issued Führer Directive No. 6, calling for an offensive in the West, calling for an attack across the First World War battlefields of Belgium and northern France. The generals convinced their Führer to delay the offensive until the spring. That delay was called initially by an American senator the phony war. But for countless people, the war and the violence were far from phony.
No capital city has suffered more terribly than Warsaw. Since the day of surrender, a blackout of total misery has enveloped the city, apart from flashes of news of appalling atrocities to illuminate its plight.
Killing squads accounted for 45% of Poland's doctors, 57% of her lawyers, 40% of professors, virtually all journalists, and more than 2,600 priests.
Most of Nazi racial theory really was pseudoscience. There is effectively no real biological basis for much of what they say.
Joseph Goebbels noted in his diary,
"The Führer's verdict on the Poles is devastating."
Hitler said,
"The standard of living in the country is to remain low. It is of use to us only as a reservoir of labor."
Actually, the Soviet occupation is even more violent than the German occupation. More Poles die in those first 1.5 years through the Soviets than die through German hands.
The Soviet Union shipped 291,513 Polish citizens to the Gulag, and in April 1940, took 21,892 Poles to the Katyn Forest and other sites, where they were shot by Soviet killers.
My father was caught by Russians, and he said, "We are going to be taken to the United States." But that was a lie. They were all taken to Katyn and shot.
On October 4th, Hitler took the salute of his triumphant forces in the Polish capital. In Britain, they waited. In France, they put their faith in the Maginot Line, complex and formidable fortifications that guarded the Franco-German border.
The French armies, march a few miles into German territory along the Rhine, but then they come back again.
In November, Joseph Stalin, confident after success in Poland, sent the Red Army into Finland, a land grab that hoped to restore territory once ruled by the Tsars.
Red planes over the Finnish capital. The terrors of total war loosed upon the unoffending population of Helsinki.
The weather was Arctic. There was a meter of snow across the ground. The Russians, you'd think, would be used to those conditions, in fact weren't. They were colossally underprepared, and the Finns exploited this.
The Winter War was a major embarrassment, and Marshal Voroshilov told Stalin why the Red Army was having difficulty securing victory.
"You have yourselves to blame for all this. You had our best generals killed."
The Red Army stumbled, led the Nazis to make a dangerous assessment. Goebbels said,
"The Russians are making absolutely no progress in Finland. The Red Army really does seem to be of little military worth."
You can imagine how small Finland and how big Third Reich. That's why Hitler understood that he's ready and we can go against Soviets and destroy them.
Lebensraum for Hitler meant seizing land in the east, but first he would ensure against a war on two fronts. His plans for 1940 were clear enough. He told Goebbels,
"I want to beat England, whatever it costs."
So there's really two objectives from the German, the Nazi point of view. Clearly they want to knock France out of the war, but for Hitler and for the Germans, the real war is always going to be in the east.
Rationing had begun in Japan and Germany before the war. At the start of 1940, it was introduced into Britain.
It's not well thought through and carefully planned. It's just the rations are designed according to what they've got to give people.
Eyewitnesses, who were children at the time, remember,
"We had 3 colour ration books, a buff colour for adults, a blue one for teenagers, and a green one for infants."
And each page had little squares with letters on them.
You took your ration card to the shop, and he had a pencil, and they'd cross off the square, which meant you'd had it that week.
The subject of this great wartime experiment in food are not white mice or guinea pigs, but human beings fighting for their lives.
the troubles faced by countless others, the targets of German racial policy, were of a different dimension. Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary,
Himmler is presently shifting populations, not always successfully.
Himmler was shifting populations onto trains and into camps and ghettos. By early 1940, a mobile gas chamber was in use in Poland. But the fighting war seemed to have stalled. The view of British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was,
whatever reason Hitler has had for making no endeavor to overwhelm us, one thing is certain. He has missed the bus.
That was April 4th. Operation Weserübung, the assault on Denmark and Norway, launched at dawn on April 9th.
Ships, transports, tanks, men, planes, all flung themselves simultaneously upon a defenseless country.
By the end of the first day, the Germans had achieved every objective.
By the afternoon of April 9th, the Germans were in complete control of all 7 ports where they had landed in the morning.
Allied action to confront the Germans in Norway was a disastrous catalogue of fumbling, bungling, and bickering. The expeditionary force sent to Trondheim outnumbered the Germans 6-1 and was routed. The Royal Navy had to evacuate 11,300 troops. 4,396 were lost. The invasion of Norway cost Germany almost half of its destroyer force, meaning a cross-channel invasion would be impossible without air superiority. The British benefited by taking possession of the Norwegian merchant marine. Il Duce, Benito Mussolini, the first dictator, having taken control of Italy in 1922, saw the scale of Germany's success and, tragically for his people, felt left out.
His decision to enter the Second World War
was very ruinous for Italy.
It is humiliating to remain with our hands folded while others write history. To make a people great, it is necessary to send them to battle, even if you have to kick them in the pants.
But the greatest impact of the disaster in Norway was felt in the British House of Commons. Neville Chamberlain, having lost the support of his party, stood down. The candidates his party favoured to replace him were not supported by the opposition, and a compromise candidate was appointed to head a national government. It was Winston Churchill.
Churchill's been portrayed as a sort of wine-bibbing Liberal Democrat. In fact, he was a whiskey-sloshing Tory thug, and that's just what we needed where Hitler was concerned.
Behind Mr. Churchill, the country rallies solidly and resolutely to the task of defeating the most sinister madman that ever aspired to world conquest.
Winston Churchill was 65 years old, and this was his time. And the timing was uncanny.
The year is 1940. The German soldier stands before all mankind, confident of his own power to destroy and conquer. Where next will Hitler's legion strike? The answer comes quickly enough. 150 Nazi divisions received the call to hurl their might on Western Europe.
May 10th, the day of Churchill's appointment, was the day Hitler unleashed his invasion of Belgium and France. History calls the Blitzkrieg.
Germany's air arm blazes the trail for the opening attacks on Holland, Belgium, and tiny, undefended Luxembourg, ready to rain untold horror upon all that spread out below their wings.
Blitzkrieg, of course, is a fantasy to a certain degree. It was a word which even Hitler despised.
Blitzkrieg is a really interesting tactic because it doesn't just work tactically. It doesn't just work on the ground. It works psychologically.
The Nazi machine broke the back of Dutch resistance in 4 days. Towns and villages were in flames as the invaders rolled on at a breathless pace, encircling the defenders and slashing their armies, destroying in the name of the new order the homes and shops of those who had dared to resist.
Joseph Goebbels recorded the campaign's ultimate objective.
The Fuhrer has set his mind on a great war against England. England must be chased out of Europe, and France destroyed as a great power. Then Germany will have hegemony, and Europe will have peace.
As the offensive stormed forward, Mussolini declared war on France and Britain. His army was smaller and less well-equipped than it had been in the First World War. Count Ciano, his foreign minister, who was also his son-in-law, wrote in his diary,
I am sad, very sad. May God help Italy.
2 days after Churchill took office on May 12th, the leading German units crossed into France, securing the north bank of the Meuse. Staff Sergeant Rubath was with the leading unit.
With my section, I reached the bank of the Meuse in a rush. Enemy machine guns fire from the right flank. During the crossing, constant firing from our machine guns batters the enemy, and thus not one casualty occurs.
And of course, at that point, the Maginot Line fails to operate because the Germans decide to attack through the Low Countries, and they also extend through the Ardennes, where the Maginot Line did not extend to.
The same day, the Dutch army was ordered to fall back for a last stand on the line Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht. Joe de Haan was a young Dutch Jew who would spend the entire war in hiding.
In the Netherlands, occupation forces behaved themselves impeccably. But of course, the lull didn't last all that long.
On the day that the Netherlands surrendered, French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud remarked,
"We have been defeated. We are beaten. We have lost the battle. The front is broken. They are pouring through in great numbers."
On the 17th, the fighting at Sedan ended.
One of the places they went through was a place called Sedan, which the French should have known about because that's where they were defeated in 1817. Nevertheless, the German armies sweep through the Ardennes.
It would have been entirely possible once the Germans break through the Meuse River around Sedan and through the Ardennes forest. The bridgehead that they make is relatively small and relatively weakly defended. If the French had counterattacked relatively quickly, they probably would have destroyed it. But they don't.
A British army officer kept a diary.
It appears that as the Sedan sector was considered so strong, the most inferior of the French divisions were posted there. When the dive bombers came down, they stood the noise for 2 hours and then bolted out like a lot of frightened old ladies.
A French staff officer admitted,
The infantry cowered in their trenches. Their only concern was to keep their heads well down.
in 7 days, the Germans had advanced 320 kilometers, crossed the Meuse, and broken into the undefended Allied rear.
There was also no proper plan to deal with the armoured breakthrough that happened in the Ardennes.
Jock Watt was with the British Army, with the Royal Tank Regiment.
The road from Boulogne was just full of moving bodies. That's all I could call them because they didn't look like people. There were men, women and children with bags, dragging little trucks. The children weren't talking or playing. All with vacant expressions, just looking straight ahead, going nowhere.
$8 million French abandoned their homes in a month.
A flaming wave of wholesale death and destruction sweeps southward through France ahead of the raging battlefront, striking down all in its path.
Eyewitnesses saw scenes of horror and despair.
The whole country seems suddenly to have given itself up. Everything has collapsed, imploded.
The 7th Panzer Division under General Erwin Rommel reached Cambrai on May 21st. On May 24th, German Army Group Van Kleist, comprising 3 Panzer divisions, stopped less than 25 kilometers from Dunkirk. In one of the war's regular and endlessly debated turning points, the German offensive was ordered to halt.
One of the fatal decisions made by Hitler and his commanders during the Second World War was to stop the Panzer's advance on Dunkirk.
The Germans have been fighting for 3 weeks. Their forces are exhausted. So the German generals, and not as many people think, Hitler, ordered them to stop on the perimeter of the Dunkirk beaches.
The tank forces in particular were absolutely exhausted from an incredibly rapid advance across France, and they just couldn't go any farther.
Von Rundstedt, commanding Army Group A, gave the order. Hitler supported the order, and Hermann Goering rejoiced. The kill would be left to his Luftwaffe, which, he confidently said, could finish off the armies trapped at Dunkirk. It could not.
The smoke from the fires of Dunkirk almost obscured the sun. But in this inferno, while the BEF and their French comrades held off the Nazis in an epic rearguard action, it was here that the yachts, motorboats and Saucy Janes performed magnificent feats of rescue.
On May 26th, the evacuation of Allied troops from Dunkirk began.
The evacuation of Dunkirk means several things. I mean, in sheer practical terms, it means that the British have literally hundreds of thousands of men to continue the fight.
There were 222 Royal Navy and approximately 860 civilian vessels at Dunkirk. The small craft ferrying the troops to the Navy vessels waiting offshore.
The soldiers were coming off the beach, clinging to bits of wood and wreckage and anything that would float.
A number of Royal Navy ships were lost, 6 destroyers were sunk, but the British very much felt that that was a price worth paying.
Instead of the 45,000 hoped for, the fleet took off 338,000 Allied troops.
The story of that epic withdrawal will live in history, both as a glorious example of discipline and as a monument to sea power.
But the army had been effectively disarmed, leaving 64,000 vehicles, 76,000 tons of ammunition, and 2,500 guns behind. On June 11th, Paris was declared an open city, and on the 14th, General Boguslav von Studnitz led the 87th Infantry Division through the heart of the city. On the 15th, 400,000 Frenchmen of the surrounded 3rd, 5th, and 8th armies surrendered. The French surrender was signed on June 22nd. On June 24th, Hitler took a 3-hour sightseeing tour of Paris. Asked about a victory parade, he said,
"I am not in the mood for a victory parade. We aren't at the end yet."
The fall of France subtracted a major industrial economy from the Allied cause and put French ports in German hands, halving the distance U-boats had to travel to reach the Atlantic shipping lanes.
France has fallen, no allies. Britain is standing alone.
The mood in England was grim. Arthur Crutchley and Peter Matthews were young men destined to serve in the armed forces.
After Dunkirk, they called for volunteers because they thought naturally we'd be invaded.
You started off with an armband. Then, as they got weapons and stuff, finally, you got your rifle.
Invasion paranoia spawned a litany of mind-bending nonsense. General Ironside, Commander-in-Chief, Home Forces, angrily reported,
"Suspicious men moving all night all over the country. There is signaling going on all over the place."
Charles de Gaulle broadcast his appeal from London.
This war has not been settled by the Battle of France. This is a world war.
On the day of de Gaulle's broadcast, Winston Churchill told the Commons,
"The Battle of France is over. I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin."